Hello, welcome to the Citrus Garden. If you're new here, my name is Christina. If you're not new here, hi, welcome back. It's great to see you. This is a pick a card reading for this week. So the intention of these readings is to highlight specific energies that you may be encountering for the week ahead, just to make it easier for you to work with. So it can play out as sort of like a longer term energy that's a bit more subtle, or it could be like a really significant event that you may be experiencing, depending on the group that you pick and also how you choose to interpret it. So for these pick a card readings, I pick an overall theme using the cards to sort of highlight what the overall energy is. So the first card out is this sunlight card, which I really love, because this card talks to me about like a rare circumstances of events. So it could be like in a very real world example, it could be something like a concert or something like that, right? Something that doesn't necessarily happen quite often, right? Like you don't necessarily go to concert every week. I don't know, depending on your lifestyle, maybe you do, but it's kind of just like a rare circumstances of events where people gather perhaps, or it's like you're witnessing something really quite like miraculous, or the events that you're witnessing are really inspiring, perhaps like really inspiring, some place that you go to perhaps gather inspiration, for example, which I really love. Sorry, I might sneeze. And then here with the next card, the Soul Passion card. Sorry, my nose is really itchy. Which is talking to me about like witnessing this event, right? Witnessing something that is so inspiring that it ignites some sort of passion is kind of how this is coming through. With this Soul Passion card, it specifically comes through with this message of like seeing signs that you can't ignore, or it's like the more you it's kind of like sometimes there are signs that are so strong that when if you try to ignore them, it just becomes kind of like having like an eyelash in your eye, where it's like you have to do something about it so that it's not irritating or something like that, right? It's not painful. So but it's like once you sort of follow the signs, it becomes more clear of why you're supposed to go in that direction. So it's kind of like witnessing something that absolutely inspires you and that propels you into motion is what this combination of cards is talking to me about, which is really incredible. And then you have here the Inner Core Solidity card, which is really interesting because it is implying sort of, when I see this sunlight card, it implies that there's others around you, right? So it could be like a gathering of some sorts, or it could be more of like a closer, more intimate relationship kind of thing, especially with this one. Because this kind of comes through with this energy of like the Ace of Swords and the Ace of Wands combined, where it's kind of like understanding some sort of truth or pattern perhaps that shifts or changes your reality in a really significant way, right? Something solid almost becoming like shattering, but in a way that promotes peace and hope and positivity, right? So shattering something that's solid or something that's very established in a way that actually provides hope and movement, especially with the next card coming out. You have the Speaking Your Word, the Voice card, which I really love because I always talk about this card as sort of being like a liberation kind of energy, right? Like being free to speak or being free to sort of express. It's because it's really interesting that it's coming through as like a concert, which is kind of talking to me like perhaps witnessing somebody who inspires some aspect of your passion in some way, because perhaps you have a similar passion, or it's like that's gonna be the start, or something that is like very that's also meant for you in some way, because we can have many different passions, right? So it may be like igniting a new passion for you, or perhaps just reigniting an old one that has gone dormant maybe in some way, right? Either way, it's like there's some sort of like liberation or expression of something that you're passionate about is kind of how it's coming through. And then I also pulled this portals card, which I really love. It was talking to me about like, well, in the guidebook, it specifically talked about the author's experience of reading the book Narnia as a child. Actually, specifically, like her dad read her Narnia as a child before she went to bed, which is so interesting because that's like one of the core memories that I have with my dad is that he also read me specifically Narnia as a child, which is talking about like if you're familiar with that story, right? Like stepping into another world, that kind of thing. So it was coming through very much, especially with this card, as like perhaps witnessing something or experiencing something, right? Experiencing something that very much shifts your reality or becomes like a very significant turning point or portal to lead you into the next part, or like something that you will carry with you for the rest of your life is kind of how it's coming through, which is really lovely. So that's the overall theme. I'm going to go into the individual groups now, and the timestamps are in the description box below. All right, so I'm going to go through the individual groups. So for group 1, we have the Alchemy Magic card, number 43. For group 2, we have Attraction Magnetism, number 37. And finally, for group 3, we have Connection, the Biome, number 44. So I will hold up all three so that you can compare. Group 1, Group 2, and Group 3. Timestamps are in the description box below. Hi Group 1, let's get started with your reading. So we're starting off here, which is really lovely, with the Completion West card, which I really love. It's also coming through with the trees and the Six of Swords in this deck. So I feel like for this week, what you will be doing or what you're being asked to work with perhaps is completing a really major cycle. This one also comes in sort of with the energy of like getting the final piece of the puzzle that allows you perhaps to move on or to like close something off. Especially with the Six of Swords though, it is kind of coming in with this energy of like closing off perhaps something that is a little bit difficult, especially because, or like going separate ways is kind of how it's coming through. Because this card, because there's 3 crows leaving and 3 crows staying, it kind of brings in the energy of like the Three of Swords, right? Something that feels difficult, especially with the trees coming in. It has kind of 2 messages. So first of all, the trees, personally, I associate as being sort of a symbol of like family, right? Like a family tree or your roots or something like that. So it could be like having to leave behind some aspect or complete a cycle, I want to say, of like some aspect that has to do in some way with a root or a foundation, especially because it's coming in with the number 4, which to me talks about stability, right? So something that is very, very stable to you, that's part of your foundation, but is now shifting in some ways because there's been like a natural end to it, is kind of how it's feeling. But the trees is also talking about, it was coming through with this message from the guidebook of like, don't be afraid to take a step away from your routines and your daily sort of things in order to just sort of take a rest underneath a tree, right? As sort of like a relaxation or kind of like just taking rest in the shade kind of energy. That's what was coming through with these 2. And then what I really love here especially are these 3 cards that are coming out together. So you have here the Ace of Embers, which is the Ace of Wands, the Geomancer, which is the Queen of Pentacles, and then the 5 of Embers, which is the 5 of Wands. But how I'm seeing this is like you're completing a really major cycle in order for this, the Ace of Embers, because again, the whole overall theme of this is some sort of like passionate new start for you, for this group, right? There's some sort of new passion I feel like that you are going towards, but it's kind of like in order to do that you have to take a step back from perhaps a daily routine or something like that, or like complete some sort of major cycle or step away from some aspect of your stability, like where you are comfortable is what this is coming through with. Especially with the Queen of Pentacles, that's sort of emphasizing again, the Queen of Pentacles is very much sort of like this nurturing energy, it's coming through a lot with home, especially with this one here, right? The Comfort card coming out next, the Comfort. So absolutely something that you're comfortable at, something that you have been giving a lot of energy to, perhaps something that you've been helping to grow and nurture, but perhaps you're having to take a step back because it's kind of like this is calling you. This is requiring your attention at this time for some reason, which is really, really interesting. I feel like perhaps as well, because the next cards that are coming out, you have here the Mars and Temperance card, which are really interesting because Mars talks about like forward momentum in some way. It could also be referencing something to do with like your physical body as well. Especially with the Queen of Pentacles coming out, it's kind of emphasizing like your physical reality. But because Mars is in Cancer right now, it's bringing in sort of this energy of temperance, of waiting. Because this Comfort card I also see as being a very like Cancerian energy. Perhaps there's been sort of a reluctance to end a certain cycle because it's somewhere that you're comfortable, right? Somewhere that like it's like you were in this energy of temperance, of perhaps waiting for the right time, or not moving forward, or like not going forward or pursuing this because for whatever reason, right? It's difficult. It's not easy. And perhaps there is perhaps a Three of Swords type energy associated with it. But what's really interesting about this card, the Comfort Hearth card, especially because the portals is the overall theme of this week, it was bringing in this energy of Harry Potter. Again, I use Harry Potter so much in my messages. That's just how it's coming through today. Fireplaces in Harry Potter are very significant portals. So sometimes fireplaces are, in that story, are ways to relay messages, right? So like they're almost like telephones in Harry Potter sometimes, though they can also be used as a method of transportation, of actually moving from one place to another with the portals. And so I feel like it's coming through for you today as being both. It's like that, first of all, you've been receiving messages, right? Like you've been receiving communication. You should go in this direction, or receiving information about it. And now is actually the time for you to step into the portal and actually move towards the thing that you're moving towards with this Comfort Hearth card, which is so incredible to me. Because the very first time that Harry uses the fireplace as a method of transportation, there is kind of a trick involved to it where you have to be extremely clear in what you're saying or how you're saying it, or like you have to like enunciate the location of where you want to be going towards, right? In this card very, very clearly. And so the first time that Harry uses this method of transportation, he ends up in the wrong place because he doesn't enunciate his words properly. So he ends up in like the shady part of town is coming through, right? Like it's something that absolutely not the place that he intended in going. But I feel like, especially with the next cards coming out, we have Mercury coming out. Of course, we're in a Mercury retrograde, which is bringing in all of that energy of like enunciate, or like being very clear in what you're saying, of like reading through all of the paperwork, so to speak, that kind of thing, making sure that you are clearly expressing yourself so that it doesn't add more confusion, or so that you don't end up in the wrong place or that kind of thing. But because it's a retrograde energy, it's also kind of like, it's kind of like, as much as you can take care in doing all that, sometimes the only way that you can learn something is like by making mistakes. That's what's coming through next, because you have here the Page of Wands, right? Where it's kind of coming through, like this one I always see as being like when you first get like a magic wand, right? Or you first discover something new. It's like there's so much excitement, so much creativity, but of course it also comes with a bit of like a trial and error kind of thing, like that it may not work perfectly the first time. It most likely will not. You kind of just have to like keep working with it, is what this is coming through with. Especially with this Five of Embers. So this is coming through kind of with two messages, where, because I see this one as being sort of like a controlled burn. I was gonna see something else there, but I stopped myself. I don't know. A controlled burn, which is kind of like, especially because it's coming in with trees, right? It kind of feels like making space for something, right? Like, because it kind of comes through. I see this card as sort of being like in order to prevent a forest fire, which is kind of like an uncontrollable burn. Sometimes you have to like burn specific, like strategic parts of the forest so that it doesn't cause a bigger one, right? Meaning like this is controlled. It's a controlled way to prevent a bigger sort of uncontrollable situation down the line. So I feel like that's kind of what this energy is encouraging you to do, is like it's wanting you to move forward perhaps and try something, or like move or do or act on some sort of like process that may be uncomfortable, but all of this is a learning experience, is kind of how it's feeling. It just feels like a learning experience. And then what's coming out next, which is so incredible, you have here the Alchemy magic card. The Alchemy magic card, which I love, because this is number 43 at this on top of this. And then you have, here, 434, right? So 43 and 34, 434, those are like really significant number synchronicities that are coming in for you today. Because this magic card I'm seeing, especially because here you have the Completion West, which is a 4. It's like you are finishing up some sort of cycle, right? And it's kind of like this is your hand, which is occupied with completing that cycle, right? It's like you have your hands full with whatever this ending is, but it's like once you put that thing down, your hands will now be free to, I want to say, connect with another, right? Especially with the encounters, with the hands sort of like shaking hands with someone. So it could be that you're meeting with someone or connecting with another person in some way. I normally don't take the bottom of the decks for these readings specifically, but for both of the decks that I'm using today, the Two of Cups was at the bottom of both of the decks, which has never happened to me in a reading before. So it's really incredible for you, this group. It's like when you put down or complete a really major cycle, and it could have to do with like leaving behind some aspect of your stability, what you're going towards is a Two of Cups, a very significant, I want to say, relationship or encounter, which is feeling like just magic to me, especially with the Mercury coming out. It could be some sort of like past energy that's coming back. Doesn't have to be though. But it could be. It's more so coming through this energy of travel, especially with the fireplace, right? It's like, I feel like maybe you will be traveling towards somebody, or just like leaving a comfort zone, perhaps leaving your physical home in some way and going towards somebody else. That's kind of what's coming through with this. And then you have here this really incredible combination of cards. So the Eight of Wands, which talks about a lot of forward momentum, right? It's like, I feel like you've already received a lot of like communication or inspiration or ideas to go towards this. This I sometimes see as sort of like being like a tunnel, right? Like where you're moving through is kind of how it's, so actually moving, actually doing something. And then here with the swan, this is the high priestess in this deck, because I feel like it's kind of highlighting again that there are perhaps illusions, but I want to say more so that it will require a bit of not everything is clear yet, is what's coming through. There's still a little bit of uncertainty or like difficulty in navigating perhaps the landscape or what's ahead, especially because you have here next the Seven of Cups, which is so interesting because of course 4 and 3 add to 7, right? So it's like you are absolutely moving towards some sort of significant partnership is how I'm saying it. But with the Seven of Cups, especially with the Magic card too, it was coming through with this energy. There was a specific line in the guidebook, I think for this card, that doubt kills more dreams than failure does, which is so interesting. Because this card I often see as being a card of hesitation or doubt, right? It's like, for these, there's like a lot of options perhaps. It's just coming through as hesitation, right? It's like you know clearly that this is the path that you are supposed to take, but it's like perhaps there's hesitation in actually choosing it, coming through as like a feeling of doubt of like, what if I'm not doing the right thing? What if this is not the right whatever? And it's just reminding you that doubt kills more dreams than failure does, because I absolutely feel like there will be sort of a trial and error kind of phase here where it's kind of like perhaps there will be failure, perhaps there will be sort of this energy of like it kind of feels like maybe you're taking a step back, or there will be steps back, like taking steps back, or it feels like a 2 steps back, 1 step forward kind of thing, maybe. But failure is one of the most powerful motivators in which to learn something, right? So it's like you have to fail in order to learn is kind of how it's coming through today, which I know is not easy. But what I love here is the Ace of Trees coming out next, because the trees are so significant, right? That's a very significant synchronicity for you this week, because as I was saying, this kind of feels like some aspect of your foundation is going through a completion or whatever, right? Like you're ending some sort of significant, stable, foundational kind of energy. But what you're going towards is another sort of Ace of Trees, which is like Ace of Pentacles. It's the start of something that's going to become as stable and as foundational. How the 434, what I like this number synchronicity 434, whenever I see that, to me that represents like building stability, especially when it comes to like other people as well, right? Like building stable relationships or building a stable home life, that kind of thing. So I feel like perhaps that might be in it for you. It could be that you're like moving house, right? Like you're leaving behind your old house and moving into another one, maybe. Could be something like that, but it could play out in many different ways for you. So apply it to your life however it resonates. I forgot to pull a Moonology card, so I'm just going to do that very quickly for you. So for group 1, the answers that you need are coming. The full moon in Gemini, which is highlighting that High Priestess card. I feel like perhaps they're still a bit unclear. Like it may not be very clear where you're going or how or when or whatever. There's still a lot of questions that are unclear, I want to say, but it's just emphasizing trust, right? It's kind of like you have to try it in order to actually figure out what's not working or what needs to shift, and not to be afraid of failure. So I'm going to leave the message there for you, group 1. If this message resonated with you, please consider subscribing, liking, or leaving a comment down below. Thank you so much for sharing your energy with me, and I hope you have a great week. Bye. Hi, group 2. Welcome to your reading. So we're going to start off here with these 2 cards. We have here the Attraction Magnetism and the Home Earth, which is really interesting. So I'm seeing this as you. This magnetism card is really interesting because it's kind of bringing in this energy of like your inner child, but specifically the magical and innocent and fun-loving kind of inner child, that version, because there's kind of coming in this energy, especially with the memories card coming out underneath this, that there is kind of like the inner child can be wounded, right? Of course, everyone has sort of like the potential to have like an inner child that's wounded, and it takes like a significant amount of healing in order to tend to that inner child. But then when you connect to sort of the magical, innocent inner child, that's sort of when a lot of things start happening for you. And I feel like that's what's coming through with this card here, with the magnetism attraction, because it's kind of like reconnecting with the magical, innocent inner child is what that's coming through with. And then paired with the home earth, which I really love, because this one I see as sort of being like the mature adult is kind of how it's coming through, or just like the nurturing mother kind of energy, right? So it's kind of like you and your inner child are harmoniously working together, because it's also coming through here with the memories, and then the sun, right? So the sun energy is the energy of growth, right? Growth, and also creativity as well with home earth. There's a lot of creativity energy in your reading today, and especially because the numbers here are 252, which to me, the 5s represent change and 2 represents sort of like union with another energy. So how I'm seeing that is that your inner child and sort of like the adult, or like the sun energy, which is kind of like your area of growth perhaps, are working together to bring about some sort of change, is kind of how that's coming through. So either within yourself or within your environment. What's really interesting though with this magnetism card, I'm going to come back to that because it ties into one of the later cards. So I'm going to come back to that card. But what's really interesting, at the bottom of the deck, you have here the 5 of Wands and the 4 of Lotuses. So the 4 of Lotuses is kind of talking about like there's something building, some sort of momentum building, some sort of external energy, which I feel like you're not necessarily seeing the source of it, but it's bringing something into your physical environment. I feel like it's the 5 of Wands. So that doesn't have to be conflict, but it could absolutely play out like that, or competition of some sorts, or just like a lot of energies in your external environment, such as like this barking dog in the neighborhood, something like that, right? That just sort of interferes with your process is kind of how it's coming through. Especially because at the bottom of the deck for this deck was the Fury Bushfires card, which is really interesting. I always see this as an external energy, always, especially because it's coming out next to the 5 of Wands, which is really interesting because how this one's coming through. So it could be another person, but it doesn't have to be. Especially with this sort of postcard, it could be sort of like old memories, right? Like something from your past that was this kind of energy that's sort of coming back in some way, and you're having to deal with it, is kind of how it's feeling. But it's coming out with the stones underneath it. So this is kind of why it's coming through, why I wanted to tie this. Anyway, so the stones to me is just something that's very solid, right? Something that's not moving, especially with this card as being sort of the overall theme. Because I feel like here with something solid is going through a major transformation. And I feel like this might be like another person in your environment, though it doesn't have to be. It could even just be like some sort of past thing. So the reason why this stones card is significant is because when I was reading the guidebook for this one, the magnetism, right? Magnets are stones often, right? Like they are an actual piece of rock that becomes magnetized, that has sort of like a polar charge, which is really interesting. Because I feel like what it is that you are creating, or what it is that you are being asked to focus on is this energy, right? This beautiful sort of both magical but also very, very practical perhaps, or like just like the inner child and the mature adult kind of energy that's coming through here, the union of those two energies, that's allowing you to create what it is that you want to create is kind of how it's coming through. But what was interesting about this magnetism card is that sometimes there's also kind of this energy of the opposite, right? The opposite charge that is present whenever something positive comes in. So it's like you're going towards your success, but as a natural law is what was coming through with this card, there's also an energy that is opposite to that. So something very magical, but in going towards the magical thing, you're also perhaps triggering an attraction of the opposite energy, which could be something like this fury bushfires, right? Just so interesting. Because it doesn't have to be anger. It doesn't have to be somebody who's angry, but it could be, especially some of the cards that are coming through. And it's just, so I'll just go through what those cards are. So these first 4 cards that are coming through. So these two I'll go through first. First of all, the 7 of Swords and the 6 of Wands, which is a really interesting combination because with these two cards, right, it's like you're creating something that is perhaps like you successful, right? Like especially with sort of like the 6 of Wands with the lights here and this sort of with the child, the magnetism card. So it could be something like accomplishing a childhood dream of some sorts, right? Like something like that, creating something that you dreamed of when you were a child or something like that. It doesn't have to be exactly, but it's just talking about finding success. But then you have here the 7 of Swords. So the 7 of Swords does normally talk about sort of like a self-sabotaging energy, especially because it's coming through with memories. So it could be something like you're reaching some sort of some form of success, but perhaps there may be some sort of like past self-sabotaging energy that's coming through almost to like disrupt this. It doesn't necessarily have to be that though, especially because this one, I always see this as sort of being external energies, right? The 5 of Wands, the Fury Bushfires, which is kind of like, so this may be somebody else, especially because the back is exposed in all of these images. It's like, but so having your back turned to this energy is kind of how I'm reading it. That's how I'm choosing to see it. I feel like you will be aware of this energy because this energy is very difficult to ignore. It's kind of what's coming through, especially with the magnetism. It's something like, because you're drawn to obviously the success, but this energy also has a draw to it for some. Perhaps maybe not you, but I'm feeling kind of like there is kind of like an aspect here of like engage, actually like are you going to choose to engage with this or not is kind of how it's coming through. Especially because here you have this, right? The Protector card and the Fighter. So the Protector is the King of Wands in this deck. The Fighter is the Knight of Swords. So this King of Wands, the Protector card in this deck specifically talks about pursuing your creative projects, right? And I feel like that's what you're doing. That's sort of like the focus for you this week is actually going really deep on like your creative projects, like really working towards it. It kind of also talks to me about like getting out ahead of it because it could be something like because of just how these cards are oriented today, it's kind of just looking like there's an energy here who is, I don't know, sometimes I see this card as like someone who is like triggered by something. So it could be like whatever it is that you're doing or you're pursuing, something about like your success or like your whatever it is that you're doing is perhaps triggering someone or making them angry, or there's this kind of just energy of the fighter, right? The wanting to fight or wanting to, it's so interesting. I don't know. I'm kind of hesitant to go into that a little bit more. I feel like that'll be specific to each of you how exactly this plays out. It doesn't have to necessarily be confrontational, but it may be. It could be very subtle as well with the fighter. It could be that because in the guidebook for the fighter, it always comes in with the caution of like, make sure you're not acting out of vengeance is what this is coming through with, which I feel like is kind of like for you, whoever's watching this for group 2, it's kind of like you can choose to turn your back to it. I feel like not necessarily leaving yourself exposed. I don't feel like it's that kind of thing, but it's more so like this one here doesn't have that much to sort of hold you down is kind of how it's feeling. They don't have any, perhaps they have some sort of draw, right? It's like they have something that might, I want to say, tempt you into engaging with them. It's kind of like someone who's trying to start a fight or something, but it's kind of like you can choose not to engage, right? You can turn your back to this energy, because what's coming out through next here is the Judgment card, which I always see as sort of like this energy of like whenever there's a struggle or whenever there's some sort of circumstance outside of your control, the only thing that you can really do is surrender to that energy, right? It's just allow it to play out however it plays out. And it's coming out through here with the Maze, which is the Temperance card, right? Which is kind of an energy of like tempering yourself, right? Holding yourself back perhaps, or just turning your back to it. Because how I'm seeing this, because it's kind of looking to me like whenever I see this Judgment card, it's kind of like you are here stuck in this place, right? Perhaps bounded by some sort of limitation in some way, like some sort of physical limitation perhaps. And it's kind of like your higher self can see the higher perspective. And especially because it's coming out with the Maze, it's kind of like you're here in one of these, like in the maze, but your higher self can sort of see it from above, from a higher perspective, to sort of lead you out of the maze is what's coming through. So it's kind of like the guidance here is perhaps not to engage, because it is coming through the Temperance, is like turn your back to it and then just trust your higher self to get you out of the situation is kind of how it's coming through. Because what you have next here is the Three of Wands, right? Of like waiting for your ships to come in, because I feel like it's kind of like there's a conflict around you that it's like you have no control over. I feel like it's kind of like it has to just play out. There are things outside of your control that are moving this situation along, perhaps. But it's kind of like, it's because you have the Three of Embers beneath that, the Three of Wands twice, right? That you are being perhaps shown the way out of this maze, out of this conflict, perhaps. And it's kind of just like an energy of like trusting and surrendering to. What's really interesting here is that you also have the Three of Cups, right? Because again, all of how I'm seeing you is like all of these energies with your back turned, right? With your back, or like what you're focused on is this sort of the magnetism, the attraction, something in your future, perhaps, like something that you're working towards. But then this Four of Cups, it's interesting. My throat is all like, it's getting all irritated now with this. So it could have something to do with like not saying something, or like perhaps that might be the guidance of like holding back, like making sure that you're not speaking from anger or vengeance or anything like that. That could be also self-sabotaging, because how I'm seeing this is like turning back, right? It's like when you turn to look at this one, or look at the past, maybe something that you've left behind, it puts you in this Four of Cups energy, which is always kind of coming through as kind of like not seeing the magic, right? Not seeing the magical aspect, which is what you're supposed to be looking at, right? Because this is the only card in this spread with your attention focused on whatever this other energy is. It's right. It's like this one here is trying to engage you in the conflict. And it's like when you actually engage, you become detached from the magical aspect, which is really interesting. Because I feel like that's it's not something to resist, right? It's like if you find yourself in this energy, it's kind of like just allow it to play out, because sometimes you will be drawn to this energy. Sometimes it may actually be more of a pressing issue. It's like you have to focus on what's in your physical environment and then temporarily perhaps be detached from the magical part of your life, perhaps. But it's kind of like with the Six of Lotuses card coming out next. This is Six of Cups, but it comes in with this energy of like perseverance, right? Especially because with all this water coming in, I feel like there is something brewing in sort of the, like something that you're not quite seeing yet, right? Something is happening on this side of whatever, and it's bringing in all of this water, I want to say, to put out whatever this fiery energy is. But it's kind of like you have to persevere in what this is, because this Six of Lotuses is kind of like the one thing that persists. And I feel like the one thing that is going to persist or survive or last or endure, whatever this like conflict energy is the success, right? Is like you are going to be successful in this situation. It's kind of like, so it could be like being perhaps confronted with a past memory that was difficult, or like you have to push through this boundary in some way. It could be like an actual person in your environment that is somehow acting from a place of anger or vengeance, maybe. But it's kind of like focus on the magical aspect of whatever it is that you're creating. This might draw you in, but it's kind of like there is a way out of this situation. And it's to trust your higher self to get you out of it. It could even be just like turning your back towards it, right? Like not even giving it any of your attention, which is really tough. It could be like just holding back on your words or something like that. But that'll depend on you. But if you find yourself in this energy of the Four of Cups, it's kind of reminding you to focus again on sort of like this magical, innocent aspect of yourself. All right, group 2, I'm going to end it there. I pulled a Moonology card for you, which I really love. It says, prosperity lies ahead, the new moon in Taurus. All right, group 2, if this message resonated with you, please consider liking, subscribing, or leaving a comment down below. Thank you so much for sharing your energy with me, and I hope you have a great week. Bye. Hi, group 3. Welcome to your reading. It's a really interesting one. I always really like group 3 readings for some reason, because there's always like some sort of like trickiness that I feel like comes with these messages, especially in group 3 for some reason. I don't know why that is. But anyway, so the first card we have here is the North Expansion, which is really lovely. So I feel like you are going on some sort of adventure is kind of how it's coming through today. But this card kind of comes in with this energy of like a vastness, right? Like a very overwhelming energy, especially what's coming through with the rest of the cards. There's an energy of overwhelm here, or potential for overwhelm, I should say. Because here, with these cards coming out next, we have the Flowers and the King of Cups, which is, the King of Cups always comes in as sort of like this energy of like having to maintain peace and calm amidst an environment perhaps that is not that, right? That's very opposite to that. So it could be in terms of like emotional state, like there may be sort of an emotional energy associated with whatever this expansion is that will require you to be sort of a master of your own emotions. Perhaps also not necessarily, because the King of Cups can be also an energy of like not acting on your emotions, or like keeping your emotions sort of locked down from the external environment, which can be very beneficial in certain cases. And I feel like that's sort of the guidance for you, is that because it's kind of like, sorry, I dropped that card, but it's kind of like, especially when there's like an energy of fear, right? It's kind of like, it is kind of coming through with a little bit of fear for some reason. just because it's an unknown, because I feel like you're stepping into an unknown is what it's feeling like. And it's kind of like, if you allow yourself to be afraid, it's not going to benefit you, basically, right? So if it kind of feels like that's what your overall energy is that you're stepping into, which is really interesting, because the next card to come out was the Crossroads, right? A significant crossroads, a significant decision point maybe, but how it's coming through, or how it was looking to me on the table, like the Crossroads card was covering this part of the flowers, which is coming through as flow, right? It's like, I feel like this is kind of like the momentum of the situation will carry you. It's kind of like, because the flowers talks about like a very significant opportunity, which is really interesting, like a prime opportunity. So it could be that there's a prime opportunity for you ahead, perhaps that you're having to make a decision about. But I feel like if you are in, like, whatever this opportunity is, feels like expansion. However, there is kind of like this like trickiness around it, because at the bottom of the deck was this chaos dark matter, which is really interesting. Sorry, it's not chaos, it's mystery. I always read this card as chaos for some reason, which is so interesting. It says mystery. But I feel like what this is talking about is that it whatever this opportunity is, feels like it has an energy of chaos around it, which to me just represents sort of something that's overwhelming, right? Like there's an overwhelming energy about this that is perhaps causing, I want to say it has the potential to influence your emotions in some way, which is really interesting. Anyway, so we're gonna go into the other cards, because the next card that you have here is the Composer, which is, I think it's the Page of Cups, but what comes through with this card is like being in tune with universal energies, or harmonizing with the universe is what this card comes through with. So I feel like this is absolutely the right decision or the right choice that you're making. It is an expansion of some sort, but it kind of feels like the first part of it, at least, feels perhaps like there may be overwhelm, or it's like not quite being able to see the road ahead. It's like, because the next card to come out is the Tunnels, right? Which, if you think about a tunnel, it's like it's a period of darkness where you're moving through the tunnel, but there is a light at the end of it, is kind of what's coming through. And it's like to remind you to focus on that, because the next, perhaps like for this week, it might feel like you're moving through a tunnel, but there is sort of this light at the end of it, is what it's coming through as. Because the next card to come out here is the Nine of Birds, which is really interesting, because the next synchronicity card is the Birds, which came out under the Chaos card, which I feel, because normally I see birds as being sort of like a very positive energy. For me personally, I love seeing birds as a synchronicity, but with the Crow coming out, the Crow to me always talks about having to use your discernment, or having to use all of your resources, all of your gifts, all of your skills, all of your intellect in order to get through the next part of this journey. And it's coming through with this is kind of like, because the Nine of Birds, the Nine of Swords traditionally talks about anxiety, right? Like feeling anxious, but it's kind of like, because I feel like there's a necessity for you to be using all of your focus or intellect or emotional balance in order to get through this next part of the journey, because it's kind of like especially with the bow, it's like keeping your eye on the target in the midst of this sort of chaos, dark matter energy, right? Whatever this is, it's like all of these energies are being stirred up, right? And it could be just sort of like illusions or fears that are getting stirred up, and it's like reminding you to keep focused on your goal or the target or the destination while you're moving through this energy. Especially with this card coming out next, you have the Knight of Pentacles, which to me always talks about like a steady journey, right? Like moving forward very steadily, taking things one step at a time, taking things slowly perhaps, or like doing things in a way that is like very routine, or like sticking to a routine, sticking to a pattern, especially if you're trying to like start something new with an expansion, right? Like if you're trying to start something, sometimes it helps to just like make it part of your routine, because the first couple of days can be kind of tough, but then the more that you get used to it, the more easy it becomes. So it could be something like that. And with the Seven of Embers, right? This always talks about sort of like defending your boundaries, or like, it just kind of feels like holding steady, right? Like holding on to your sense of self in the midst of sort of fiery or unknown or a lot of change kind of energies around you, especially with this card, the Ace of Wands, right? These two cards came out like this. So it could just be like, because it's almost like moving through a tunnel, but because of that, your visibility is affected, right? Perhaps you can't see ahead or what's ahead, and it's kind of like the light at the end of the tunnel is almost like within yourself. To be cliche, it's kind of just like they're focusing on your own sense of self while you're moving through this transitory period, is kind of how it's feeling, which is really interesting, because the next card out is the Connection Biome card, which I love so much. I knew this card was going to come out today. I didn't know which reading, but I knew it was going to come out. This kind of feels like your goal, right? The destination, whatever that is for you. It doesn't have to be connection or biome. But this card always talks to me about sort of like your world, your immediate environment, your space, your neighborhood. It kind of comes in with this energy of like focusing. It could be like focusing on what's in front of you, which is really interesting, because it's kind of like, so it could be something like this. Feels like this dark matter energy feels like it could be something like what's going on in the world in general, right? Like if you watch the news, this is sometimes how it feels. This sort of dark matter mystery energy where there's like a lot of unknowns going on, or there's a lot of like just like tricky energies. But then this Connection Biome is kind of just like taking a walk around your neighborhood and seeing just like what kind of world that you want to create, right? That kind of thing. So these two energies are very much like this is the tunnel that you're having to go through. This is the light at the end of the tunnel, right? The dream, the goal, whatever it is that you're trying to move towards, which is really interesting, because you also have next the Joy Music card. I don't normally, I only pulled 2 cards from this deck for the other groups and then the bottom of the deck, but for some reason this one wanted to come out as well, the Joy Music card. And you also have here the Empress, right? Which is a very sort of like, again, with the world, right? What it is that you want to create and focusing on that, especially with Joy Music. It's just like connecting to your joy, or nurturing yourself, or connecting to whatever it is that you are wanting to create with the Ace of Wands, especially if we tie it back to the theme, right? You are moving through some sort of threshold of some sort of tunnel, but what's inside the tunnel, what's inside this sort of transitional period is a lot of unknown mystery, dark matter kind of energies that you're having to almost like close your eyes to, right? Like not let that energy distract you from what it is that you were creating. Because it's kind of like sometimes, when there's like a lot of a noisy environment, it's like just putting on the happiest music that you can find just to get you through perhaps like a difficult or noisy environment for temporarily, perhaps just to sort of like, so that you're not distracted by sort of things that are around you, perhaps, which is really interesting because that could be what this is too, the Five of Pentacles, because this is what I'm seeing as the tunnel energy, right? Perhaps like temporarily having to shut yourself off from what's around you in order to make it through to the other side. Because this card talks to me about like a self-imposed kind of, it's almost like a hermiting, but it's not necessarily in terms of like hermiting in order to find something about yourself. It's like a self-isolating energy, because whatever's around you is not something that you want to get entangled with, is what this is kind of talking about for me. That's kind of how I'm seeing it, is that perhaps in order to get through this sort of tunnel, you have to self-isolate or remove yourself in some way, perhaps even just like putting on a pair of headphones and listening to music to remove yourself energetically, perhaps, from whatever's around you, maybe. Because what's so interesting is that this is feeling very much like a temporary energy, right? The Five of Pentacles. So it could be like a restriction of resources in some way, because what comes out after this, you have the Eight of Trees and the Ten of Trees, which is the Ten of Pentacles in this deck. So you are creating your abundance, right? You're going from, because this temporary period, the tunnel, is perhaps like a lack of resources, but this period is necessary where you're transitioning to this part, the Eight of Pentacles and the Ten of Pentacles, which is like abundance and prosperity. And this Ten of Pentacles I always see as sort of like a long-term legacy kind of energy. That's sort of how I see it. And the Peacemaker, which is the King of Cups again. So you have the King of Cups twice in your spread today, which is talking about like really having to maintain your inner peace throughout whatever this transitory period is. It absolutely feels temporary to me. And also, which is really interesting, at the bottom of the deck of these two tarot decks, we have the Commander and the King of Pentacles. So the Commander is the King of Pentacles in this deck. So you have the King of Pentacles twice, which is so interesting, because in group one, I also was talking about they had the Two of Cups at the bottom of their deck, which has never happened to me in a single reading, where you had the same card at the bottom of two different decks, and it's happened twice in this reading today, which is really incredible. So I just found that worth mentioning. So you have the King of Pentacles, which is talking about like your stability, right? Like your ability to give as well. With the Peacemaker, I always get this vibe of like bringing peace to a situation. I feel like that's part of what it is that you're creating, because this Ten of Trees kind of gives this energy of like, especially with the connection biome, right? Creating a world where you can give peace to others, or give like a sense of stability to others, or because you have so much resources, you can share with others, that kind of thing. So I feel like that's sort of like the light at the end of the tunnel, right? What it is that you're trying to focus on or build or move towards. But it's kind of like this period, for however long it lasts, is kind of just like having to move through the tunnel towards this place. And perhaps just like using things like music and connecting to joy as much as possible, in order to sort of nurture and defend this idea or inspiration, or your story or yourself, or whatever this Ace of Wands represents to you. All right, group 3. I'm gonna end it there, but I did pull a Moonology card, so very appropriate for you. It says New Moon in Pisces, meditate and contemplate. So I'm going to end the reading there. If this message resonated with you, please consider subscribing, liking, or leaving a comment down below. Thank you so much for sharing your energy with me, and I hope you have a great week. Bye.